A very happy Lord's Day to everyone. Welcome into today's daily Bible reading for June the 12th. We are reading today in Ezekiel chapter 40 and also in Mark chapter 7. Ezekiel 40 and Mark chapter 7 are the texts for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let's get to our reading in Ezekiel. This begins a section where we are looking at the dimensions that are given for this new temple that Ezekiel is seeing. Now, again, this is another one of the more hotly debated and contested texts within Ezekiel. So I want to simply present this as something we have to decide as we're looking at this text. Is this something that is literal or is this something that is figurative? Which is it? I'm not going to really say one way or the other. I mean, I guess I could say I think it is figurative in nature. I think it's symbolic in nature. But that's something each of us have to decide. And if it is literal, then if it is literal, we have to figure out if it has taken place or when it would take place. If it is symbolic, same question though. When will it take place or has it taken place? I've enjoyed reading Warren Wiersbe's commentary. It's a short commentary on Ezekiel, and he's very much in the camp of this is a literal thing. He's a premillennialist though. So he would definitely take it in such a way because that has to be it in order to fit his system. For me, I'm not much about systems. I would much rather just allow the text to be what the text is and not feel as if I need to do something that is going to read the text in such a way in which a particular system that I have allegiance to is going to be. Sorry about that. I'll get some on the screen back here or at the wall back here. I don't want to have to read the Bible in such a way that it fits a particular system of thoughts or theology. I want the text to be what the text is. So with that being the case, I think that this is a literal or a figurative or symbolic might be a better way of understanding it, foretelling of the future temple. And I think just not bearing the lead at all, show my hand that I think this is referring to the church and the building up of the people of God as the church. And that I think is very clearly seen throughout the New Testament. That is a very, very clear teaching that the people who belong to the kingdom of God, they are the temple. They are the royal priesthood. So that said, there's not really much as far as taking any thoughts away here in these chapters 40, 41, and 42. So I'm just going to read them, allow you to chew on them and think upon them. And we'll go from there. So here is Ezekiel chapter 40 and verse number 1. In the 25th year of our exile at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month in the 14th year after Jerusalem had been captured, on that very day the Lord's hand was on me, and he brought me there in visions of God. He took me to the land of Israel and set me down on a very high mountain. On its southern slope was a structure resembling a city. He brought me there, and I was a man whose appearance was like bronze with a linen cord and a measuring rod in his hand. He was standing by the city gate. He spoke to me, Son of man, look with your eyes and listen with your ears and pay attention to everything I'm going to show you, for you have been brought here so that I might show it to you. Report everything you see to the house of Israel. Now there was a wall surrounding the outside of the temple. The measuring rod in the man's hand was 6 units of 21 inches. Each unit was the standard length plus 3 inches. He measured the thickness of the wall structure. It was 10.5 feet, and its height was the same. Then he came to the gate that faced east and climbed its steps. He measured the threshold of the gate. It was 10.5 feet deep. One threshold was 10.5 feet deep. Each recess was 10.5 feet long and 10.5 feet deep. And there was a space of 8 3/4 feet between the recesses. The inner threshold of the gates on the temple side next to the gate's portico was 10.5 feet. Next, he measured the gate's portico. It was 14 feet, and its jambs were 3.5 feet. The gate's portico was on the temple side. There were 3 recesses on each side of the east gate, each with the same measurements, and the jambs on either side also had the same measurements. Then he measured the width of the gate's entrance. It was 7.5 feet, while the width of the gate was 22 3/4 feet. There was a barrier of 21 inches in front of the recesses on both sides, and the recesses on each side were 10.5 feet square. Then he measured the gate from the roof of one recess to the roof of the opposite one. The distance was 43.75 feet. The openings of the recesses faced each other. Next, he measured the porch, 105 feet. The distance from the front of the gate at the entrance to the front of the gate's portico on the inside was 87.5 feet. The recesses and their jambs had beveled windows all around the inside of the gate. The porticos also had windows all around the inside. Each jamb was recorded with palm trees. Then he brought me to the outer court, and there were chambers and a paved surface laid out all around the court. 13 chambers faced the pavement, which flanked the courtyard's gates and corresponded to the length of the gates. This was the lower pavement. Then he measured the distance from the front of the lower gate to the exterior front of the inner gate. It was 175 feet. This was the east. Next, the north is described. He measured the gate of the outer court facing north, both its length and width. Its 3 recesses on each side, its jambs and its porticos had the same measurements as the first gate, 87.5 feet long and 43.75 feet wide. Its windows, porticos, and palm trees had the same measurements as those of the gate that faced east. 7 steps led up to the gate, and its portico was ahead of them. The inner court had a gate facing the north, like the one on the east. He measured the distance from gate to gate. It was 175 feet. He brought me to the south side, and there was also a gate on the south. He measured its jambs and portico. They had the same measurements as the others. Both the gate and its portico had windows all around, like the other windows. It was 87.5 feet long and 43.75 feet wide. Its stairway had 7 steps, and the portico was ahead of them. It had palm trees on its jambs, one on each side. The inner court had a gate on the south. He measured from gate to gate. On the south, it was 175 feet. Then he brought me to the inner court through the south gate, where he measured the south gate. It had same measurements as the others. Its recesses, jambs, and portico had the same measurement as the others. Both it and its portico had windows all around. It was 87.5 feet long and 43.75 feet wide. There were porticos all around, 43.75 feet long and 8.75 feet wide. Its porticos faced the outer court, and its jambs were decorated with palm trees. Its stairway had 8 steps. Then he brought me to the inner court on the east side, where he measured the gate. It had the same measurements as the others. Its recesses, jambs, portico had the same measurements as the others. Both it and its portico had windows all around. It was 87.5 feet long and 43.75 feet wide. Its portico faced the outer court, and its jambs were decorated with palm trees on each side. Its stairway had 8 steps. Then he brought me to the north gate. When he measured it, and had the same measurements as the others, as did its recesses, jambs, and portico. It also had windows all around. It was 87 feet long and 43.75 feet wide. Its portico faced the outer court, and its jambs were decorated with palm trees on each side. Its stairway had 8 steps. There was a chamber whose door opened into the gate's portico. The burnt offering was to be washed there. Inside the gate's portico, there were 2 tables on each side on which to slaughter the burnt offering, sin offering, and guilt offering. Outside, as one approaches the entrance of the north gate, there were 2 tables on one side and 2 more tables on the other side of the gate's portico. So there were 4 tables inside the gate and 4 outside, 8 tables in all, on which the slaughtering was to be done. There were also 4 tables of cut stone for the burnt offering, each 31.5 inches long, 31.5 inches wide, and 21 inches high. The utensils used to slaughter the burnt offerings and the sacrifices were placed on them. There were 3-inch hooks fastened all around the inside of the room, and the flesh of the offering was to be laid on the tables. Outside the inner gate, within the inner court, there were chambers for the singers, one beside the north gate facing south, the other beside the south gate facing north. Then the man said to me, the chamber that faces south is for the priests who keep charge of the temple. The chamber that faces north is for the priests who keep charge of the altar. These are the sons of Zadok. The ones from the sons of Levi who may approach the Lord to serve him. Next, he measured the court. It was square, 175 feet long and 175 feet wide. The altar was in front of the temple. Then he brought me to the portico of the temple and measured the jambs of the portico. They were 8 3/4 feet thick on each side. The width of the gate was 24.5 feet, and the side walls of the gate were 5 1/4 feet wide on each side. The portico was 35 feet across and 21 feet deep, and 10 steps led up to it. There were pillars by the jambs, one on each side. Ezekiel chapter 40. Again, I'll have some more thoughts as we conclude chapter 42, but just again, the question is this literal or figurative? Maybe some thoughts to consider. If it is literal, then why is there no command for this to ever be built? That's interesting to me. Number 2, this is never referred to as being anything in Jerusalem. Number 3, why are there no height dimensions mentioned? Or there's a few scattered here and there, but as far as the height dimensions themselves, as was given in other temple renderings, why are they not mentioned here? So again, just some questions to ponder, to think, okay, are we thinking about a physical, literal temple that is supposed to be built, or we're thinking about something that is more figurative and symbolic in nature? And what we see here is this is a vision. Again, it's a vision of something that Ezekiel is currently seeing, and it never says that this is to be built. Interesting, and it should play into whether or not we consider this as being literal or figurative. But nonetheless, that is Ezekiel 40, 41, Ezekiel 41 and Ezekiel 42 will also have more details of this temple, and we'll be getting to those in the next couple of days. But to conclude our reading for this morning, we're looking here in Mark chapter 7, where Jesus deals with some issues with the Jewish leadership. He also interacts with a Gentile mother who shows tremendous faith, and also he does some very incredible teachings with, let's see here, there's a deaf man who was brought to him in the Decapolis, and he's going to interact with them, and the response of the people is very strong. We're going to see that at the end of this particular chapter. Let's read here in Mark chapter 7. The Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him. They observed that some of his teachings, or excuse me, some of his disciples were eating bread with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. For the Pharisees and all the Jews all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, keeping the traditions of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they have washed, and there are many other customs they have received and keep, like the washing of cups, pitchers, kettles, and dining couches. And that concludes a parenthetical statement that Mark gives just to give the reader some background as to what he is referring to here about the washing of hands. Picking up to verse number 5, so the Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders, instead of eating bread with ceremonially unclean hands?" Jesus answered them, "Isaiah prophesied correctly about you hypocrites. As it is written, the people honor me. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. They worship me in vain, teaching as doctrine human commands. Abandoning the command of God, you hold on to human tradition." He also said to them, "You have a fine way of invalidating God's command in order to set up your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and whoever speaks evil of father or mother must be put to death. But you say, if anyone tells his father or mother, whatever benefit you might have received from me is Corban, that is an offering devoted to God, you no longer let him do anything for his father and mother. You nullify the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down, and you do many other similar things." Summoning the crowd again, he told them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. Nothing that goes into a person from the outside can defile him, but the things that come out of the person are what defile him." When he went into the house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him about the parable, and he said to them, "Are you also as lacking in understanding? Don't you realize that nothing going into a person from the outside can defile him? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into the stomach and is eliminated." Another parenthetical statement from Mark, "Thus he declared foods clean. And he said, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the people's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, thefts, murders, adulteries, greed, evil actions, deceit, self-indulgence, envy, slide, pride, and foolishness. All of these things come from within and defile a person. He got up and departed from there to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, but he could not escape notice. Instead, immediately after hearing about him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she was asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. But Jesus said to her, "Let the children be fed first, because it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she replied to him, "Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "Because of this reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." When she went back to her home, she found her child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. Again, leaving the region of Tyre, he went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee through the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had difficulty speaking and begged Jesus to lay his hand on him. So he took him away from the crowd in private. After putting his finger in the man's ears and spitting, he touched his tongue. Looking up to heaven, he sighed deeply and said to him, "Ephatha," that is, be opened. And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak clearly. He ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more they proclaimed it. And they were extremely astonished and said, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." Mark chapter 7. I want to note the beginning of the chapter, this issue that the Pharisees were having with unclean hands. The explanation that is given here again is an explanation for the Jewish audience, or excuse me, for the non-Jewish audience. If there are Romans, Gentiles who are reading this and they don't understand the unwashed hands thing, that is explained to them. But here's the whole point of it. This was a Jewish tradition that was used, and I like the way, again, Wiersbe in his writing on this says that what the Jewish tradition would do is the Jewish tradition would act as a fence around the law, that the fence of tradition was put there to protect the law. So there was a divinely given prohibition that the Jews had taken a step further by their own tradition in order to protect the prohibition itself. So they were adding extra regulations on top of what God had regulated. And that right there is a true definition of Pharisee, if we want to have one. I know sometimes people want to throw around the accusation of Pharisee as simply being someone who is concerned with obeying the laws of God. But I never see that as being a bad thing. I never see Jesus condemning someone for wanting to faithfully simply obey God, to do it with a pure heart and correct motives. But what I do see is what is condemned here, that they made over regulations. That's Phariseeism. Phariseeism is making up standards and regulations that are beyond what God says and demanding that other people hold to them. Now, if I myself might have a conscience against something, or I know that going to do this particular thing I know is against God's will, but in order to keep myself from even getting close to that, I want to establish this other boundary for myself. I can do that. That's fine. I can absolutely do that. But to bind that other people do that as well, that is overstepping God's authority, and that is making our authority the binding authority. And we certainly don't want to do that. We want to respect God's law, yes, but we also need to respect the liberty of others. That we all have this common binding authority, which is God's authority. And if God has said we don't do something, then we don't do that thing. Now, if I myself want to do something else to even avoid that, then fine, I can do that. But to demand that others do the same, friends, that's Phariseeism. And that's something we ought not do. We don't want to do that whatsoever. We do not want to create fences that we are going to bind on others as if we have authority to do that. We do not at all. So let us all think today about respecting God's authority and about following it and respecting it because it is the ultimate authority. And yes, we might even see value in taking extra steps in one particular way. That's great. That's great if we feel necessary to do that. But let's not judge someone else for not doing the same. Let's not try to judge someone for eating with unwashed hands, as we might call it, as we see here from this text. Thanks so much for tuning in to this daily Bible reading. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave those in the comment section, either on Facebook or YouTube. I'm excited to be with the church family here in just a bit, as we'll be beginning our special series of studies with Jason Shackelford from Alabama. I believe he's at the Gardendale Church in Alabama. He'll be speaking to us 3 times today, at 10, at 11, and also at 4 this afternoon. It's going to be a great day of time spent together in God's word and just one another. What 2 things that we should love more than almost anything else: time spent in the word and time spent together with one another. Very much looking forward to this day today, and we're also looking forward to reading with you again tomorrow and for our studies throughout the rest of this week as well. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please let those be known. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day. May God bless you in all that you do. Take care, and God bless.